Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things that you can buy that will actually help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This reason is why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current core setup consists of the Phantom saddle, tethered one sticks, and the Predator platform, and along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com. If you're like me, you spend a lot of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times are to hunt. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters and stands at the nexus of machine learning and whitetail deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've had an opportunity to use the desktop version last year and have been using the iOS app this season, and it has replaced all my other mapping tools. Visit SpartanForge.ai and sign up today, or head to your iOS or Android app store and download it today. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. Skull Brew Coffee roasts premium single origin coffee, guaranteeing to deliver the freshest coffee directly to your doorstep. The kicker? They're 2% for conservation certified and donate 10% of their proceeds back to organizations who support the interests of our hunting community. So go to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick up one of their 3-killer roasts and fuel your hunt and fill more tags with Skull Brew Coffee. Welcome to the Truth from a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you are listening to episode number 259. Today, I'm hanging with Paul Putera to talk about tracking down mature bucks from the big woods to the swamps. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. The gun season here in Pennsylvania has closed. So for me, that means archery season is back in full effect as I live in a special regs unit. So I don't have a break here in between gun season and archery season. A lot of Pennsylvania does. I know the one piece I was hoping to get back to here at some point during the late season. It follows kind of the statewide regulations for what I'll call quote unquote kind of normal areas, if you will. And that doesn't open up to the 26th or the 27th, something like that. It's always right after Christmas when it opens up. I need to look at the book and see exactly what date that is, that I'll be able to get back north, if you will, and see if I can make some magic happen. If you're not paying attention to the second peak rut date, man, that is something you should be kind of taking a look at. That's one thing last year that I was using Spartan Forge for quite a bit, was actually taking a look at the second peak rut date. I've always kind of been able to get in and around it, and I just kind of happen to always miss those primary kind of days or that flurry of activity. You know, it's not like November, end of October, or whatever the case is, you know, where you have that longer period of time and you see like a ramp up and and just what I'll call just a pile of activity, or just, a ton of deer movement. I wouldn't say that it's that so much as that it's very kind of specific, if you will. At least that's been my experience. And there's dates, and regionally, with respect to region, where those dates are going to be kind of primed. Last year, I kind of paid attention to what the Spartan Forge app was telling me to kind of see, well, when is that activity going to kick up? So if the peak breeding date is X, you should probably see a little bit of activity and a ramp up a couple of days before, just like you would, in late October, early November, whenever you start to have does that are getting warm or getting ready to come into estrus. And last year I paid attention to it, and sure enough, I had some action from the tree, not from a shooter perspective, but just, deer activity that was not what you would think to be typical December post gun activity, or post gun hunting activity, or gun season activity. And then my trail cameras for a handful of days leading up to that peak breeding date, that second peak breeding date, we're pretty active in some very specific kind of scrape locations. And so I've been paying attention to that, seeing when that's kind of going to land this year, and what that date is. And so I'm kind of making plans for that. And it'll be toward the end of this week. It's different regionally. I know, it might be a couple days before in Michigan or after in Michigan or Ohio or whatever the case is. It might even just vary, within the state. But I know my peak breeding date, I think for this area, the second peak breeding date is around December 12th. And so I'm already actually noticing scrapes that had gone dormant that I had cameras on, at least some cell cameras on, are starting to pick up now. Where they were kind of dead for the past several weeks, have all of a sudden started to see activity. So if you want to check out Spartan Forge, you can head over to spartanforge.ai as the website. You can use the promo code TRUTH and it'll get you a discount signing up for for your account. And then you go to your app store, whether it's your Android app store or your Apple app store, whatever the case is, and then download it from there, and then enter your credentials that you signed up with on the website, and you'll be able to download the app and get all this cool information. Aside from, the second peak breeding date and stuff like that, just a lot of predictive kind of modeling for, if deer are going to be in transition areas, if their patterns are going to be abnormal, very abnormal, or just kind of status quo. So go ahead and check that out. One other thing to pass along to you before we jump into today's podcast, or two things, I guess. TFTS21 promo code for any Truth from the Stand merch. You can go to truthfromthestand.com, hit the merch tab, use that promo code, get yourself some savings, pick up a couple things for some stocking stuffers, if you will. And then also, I just launched a new video on the YouTube channel. So head over to Truth from the Stand YouTube channel and check out my new kayak video. I've been using this kayak for the past 2 seasons, kind of have it dialed in and how I like to use it and what, basically what the setup is. And I go through the bells and whistles of that, and and why I like to use kayak access or water access in some instances where it might be to your advantage. A lot of the stuff you've probably heard me talk about on this podcast, referring to access and using some form of boat. But I just kind of run through the gear that I'm using and what my kayak setup is. So with that, we have a cool show for you guys today. Have Paul Putera on. Paul is from New Jersey. It's a fella I've been watching for a little while, and he's a grinder, man. Like, he gets after it. He's a smart woodsman. We went back and forth this summer text messaging, just different types of plants that we were seeing or that he was seeing, kind of, sharing, some of the things that he looks for aside from your staple kind of, white oak acorns, red oak acorns, whenever the white oaks are gone and the cold weather hits during late season. He does target a lot of kind of areas that, a lot of bow hunters might walk past. And when I say that, I'm kind of referring to maybe some areas that don't have a lot of trees that you might have to ground hunt from, or that might be, I don't want to say like a valley field, but just like grass fields, wildflower fields, or whatever the case is, that seem to not be great places for deer habitat or deer to spend a significant amount of time. He's finding a lot of success there. He's also sharp with, tracking a buck, because he's trying to kill the most mature deer in his particular area. And a lot of times the way he's qualifying that is he's cutting a track and understanding, okay, this is the big track, there's a big deer here. If he doesn't have, a visual of a deer, or even if he does have a visual of a deer, to know that that deer is still likely in the area based on, I saw this deer when I was glassing somewhere, or, on a hunt somewhere. I now found a track that lines up with the age I think this deer might be at, or whatever the case is. It's a big deer, so I think this might be that deer. And so just a really sharp woodsman. Gets it done with regularity. He's killed 2 great bucks this year. One I know was in New Jersey. I'm trying to remember if the other one was in Pennsylvania off the top of my head, or not. I don't recall. But he hunts New Jersey and Pennsylvania a lot, and I think even New York. So he's hunting some pretty high pressured states, and just killing great bucks, mature deer with regularity. I think you guys will dig the show. So with that, we'll go ahead and get jumped into the show. And as always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have a fella on. He's been on a few different podcasts. I like to call, he fits the bill of that kind of class of folks that I like to talk to, that are referred to as the quiet killers, where, they don't own a tree stand company. They don't own, some type of outdoor company or something like that, but they are just dudes that get it done consistently on mature deer and have a method and are successful at it. And I'm talking to none other than Mr. Paul Putera. How's it going, brother?
Oh, pretty good. How you doing?
I'm good, man. So it's like, how do you like that, man? It's like, yeah, I'm classifying you as a quiet killer. I always like to find guys that are like, I don't want to say you're under the radar, because I know you've done some podcasts in the past, but I like to find guys and talk to guys who are just like normal dudes who have a passion for killing mature deer and have a knack of getting it done. And I like to refer to you guys as quiet killers. Do you think that fits the bill? Do you feel like a quiet killer?
Yeah, it sounds pretty good.
Sounds pretty good. You'll take it as long as tags are getting filled, right?
Yep, that's right.
Nice.
I
So
just I just like chasing them big ones.
that's right, man. That's right. So, I know you and I have exchanged texts over like probably like the past year, and it's like honestly, it's like a little embarrassed that it's taken me this long to actually get you on to be quite honest, because I don't want to say you're local, but you're from the same region, and I particularly like talking to guys that are hunting in very similar areas to me, or at least close in proximity, because we have a lot in common. But for folks out there that maybe haven't come across you in the past and so forth, if you wouldn't mind, just as a little bit of an icebreaker, let folks out there that are listening know where you're from and what you do for a living.
Well, I'm from northern New Jersey,
Hmm.
and I pretty much grew up right in this area all my life. I've been hunting since I think 1996. I'm gonna say
Hmm.
so. Been hunting, doing that my whole life. My dad was a big time hunter in the Adirondacks, and basically I just kind of started off doing the whole run and gun thing from the beginning.
Okay, that's
Started with
interesting.
a started with an old Windwalker tree stand and screwing steps back in the day.
Nice, nice. Yeah, it's the gear has changed quite a bit since then, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually still ran that stand up until about 15 years ago, though.
Oh, really? I have a
Yeah.
buddy. He's an old timer. Actually, it's the guy who kind of got me into bow hunting. And people that listen to this show have heard me talk about him before. His real name isn't Tate, but that's what I call him, is Tate. And he used an old, good Lord, man, I don't even know, like a loggy bayou that I think it was called
Yep.
a loggy light. Actually, it was a loggy light, is what it was. And I mean, there was no straps on it for him to kind of. It was a climber, and there was no straps on it for him to like move it up with his feet or whatever. And so like he basically there wasn't really a seat. Like it's not like a lone wolf that has like two separate sections, like where you can use like as a hand climber or whatever. It was like
Hmm.
he was doing the old bear hug method up and down the tree essentially. And he's not a young fella, man. Like he's retiring actually in January, and he used that thing up until like 3 years ago. And I finally got him into a saddle because I was like, "Hey, buddy, you getting a little older, pal. You're not as agile as you once were, so maybe you ought to think about being strapped to the tree." You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I've messed with those things in the past.
yeah,
They work good until you get an ice storm, and then you try to climb down, and you make it all the way to the bottom in one movement.
yeah. He's had a couple of those. I remember there was one hunt we were on, and he was on. I don't even remember what kind of tree he was on, but it was just like one of those trees where it got wet. There was some rain, and it was just like the bark was super slick, and he went to come down. He made it a couple moves down, and then just all of a sudden it just gave way, and he just basically it was like he was on like a greased pole basically sliding down. And he might have had a little bit of chafing on the old inner thighs when he got done with that descent. And I think that might have been the selling point on maybe I need to switch up my stand situation. So but man, you mentioned your dad, and he, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned he kind of grew up in the Adirondacks, and was trapping and stuff like that. So how did you get started hunting? Like, was it the classic, young guy following his dad around the woods, and and things like that, or was it different?
Yeah, that's my dad was like full throttle chasing big bucks ever since I was a little kid. So I just basically just started going with him and following him around, and
Hmm.
that's how it went from there. And I just kind of picked up from what he taught me, and I expanded on it and kind of brought my own style into it, and just kept going.
Right. So what kind of things were you picking up from him? Because like some of the guys that I've talked to from that region, at least, you know, um, well, a couple different ways, I guess, might be a way to think about it. Is one, it's like I've talked to guys like Hal Blood. I know he's not from New York, but like you're talking on the Adirondacks, you're talking like big wilderness areas,
Yep.
which would be similar to what Hal's doing in Maine and stuff like that. And he's obviously doing a lot of tracking, cutting tracks, and things of that nature. Not really so much doing stand hunting or sitting in a spot to hunt per se. He's kind of always moving and tracking. And then there's other guys, that I've had on like a Todd Mead, who's a great hunter, hunting the Adirondack specifically. And he's more kind of probably what you and I would maybe be familiar with or similar to, which is like, he's doing his scouting and finding the sign and figuring out where deer are wanting to live and, you know, figuring out where he can make an ambush and, and things like that. I don't want to say it's how he hunts exclusively, but that's, definitely, a large part of how he hunts. So was your dad kind of more of like tracking and spotting and stalkings, that Hal Blood style, or was he more of like what you would think of as like a traditional archer, type of archery hunter?
He was a combination of it. I mean, he'd track, but if he had a good spot, he had to sit, he'd sit.
Mm-hmm.
But he just would read the woods and know what he had to do. He'd get on a track or something and follow it and be like, all right, I got to set up and wait this buck out in this section. He's going to come through here. I'll kill him in the next couple of days or something like that.
Right.
But he was,
nice.
constantly following deer and actively hunting them down. And,
right.
So, and that's basically what I'm doing too. I'm doing the same thing. I'm just tracking them down and getting close.
Right. And that's what I was going to ask actually next. Like what is like what do you think is the biggest strategy, or what is the biggest kind of pointer, I guess, that maybe you picked up from him looking back on it?
I think just kind of learning how to read a track and be able to see where the deer are going to go and understand where a big buck is going to travel was a big thing. He was really good at figuring out where the bigger deer were in the area.
Right. Did he do any?
He'd always get on.
So he was doing tracking and stuff, but did he do any trapping as well? Because I know like some of the times whenever I talk to some of these, old timers, they get a real good sense for things outside of deer hunting just by, running trap lines and stuff like that. Did he do some things like that?
He ran trap lines as a kid. He made money doing it when he was a kid.
Nice.
Back in the day.
Yeah. It seems like guys that I talk to that have that trapper background, they just seem to have a really good sense about, how deer, just how animals want to use the woods in general, and they seem to just have like maybe they are more in tune with like the subtle things that maybe a normal deer hunter might bypass. Do you kind of feel the same way?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And it's like you can use that for scouting and everything. You could just follow them around, and if you know how to follow a deer, you could just follow them and see where they're going and see what they're doing and see why they're doing it. Right. And then it kind of opens up a lot of doors to a lot of different possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely one thing I need to get better at. It's funny that, my buddy Chad actually spent a little bit of time with Dan Enfalt, doing some hunting this past, I guess October together. And, Chad and I were in Kansas together. And so we had a long time to kind of talk about just our season and things we've been doing and whatever. And that was one thing that he mentioned was just, Dan as an example, his ability to just kind of find a track. Like he said, Chad and I would go into a place and we would scout and we would see tracks and we would look at tracks or look for tracks and, and pay attention to them, but not to the level of detail that Dan would necessarily. Like Dan, all he wanted to do was cut a track. And then from there, once he understood directionally where that deer might be headed based on that track, he could then look at it and go like, well, here are the bedding opportunities. And this is in an area that is hard to hunt that they were together in. And he was able to, within a couple of days, get on a good deer and actually bump the deer out, like figured out where he was bedded and ended up bumping him, like I think on the third or fourth day. And they only hunted, I think, like 4 days. And, Chad was like, if he would have had another probably like 2 or 3 days, like he probably would have had at least an encounter with that deer, if not killed it, and it was all based off of finding that first, like a big track and going, all right, here's what I think that deer is doing. Do you kind of follow a very kind of similar logic to that, or is it a little bit different?
Yeah, it's pretty similar to that. I mean, I'll go and find a track somewhere where I find one, good spot, like big primary scrape area or area with some signpost rubs, or I'll check along roadways or logging trails or something, and then I'll pick up a track and I'll just kind of follow that deer back in there and figure out where he's going, and I'll just keep pulling up my maps and looking at satellite and topography, and I'll just kind of be like, all right, that deer is probably going to be bedded right there, and then I'll just go in and get as close as I possibly can and set up.
Right. Nice. So it seems like you had a pretty good season so far, man. I know we were kind of trading some pictures, but before we jump into kind of like your season and so forth, can you just talk to me a little bit about, the places that you're hunting? Because I know you're from New Jersey, like you mentioned. I know you do some hunting in PA, some in New York, expanding out to Ohio, and especially when you start talking about like Jersey and PA, like those are tough states to hunt just in general, and especially when you're talking, mature deer, it can be a tall task to even find one. And in some cases, I was texting with a buddy of mine the other day, and there's one area in Pennsylvania where I have a handful of mature deer that I was able to find, and it's kind of a big woods, mountainous kind of area. But locally, what I told
Yep.
him, just in the area that I'm hunting, locally, because it's a little, I don't want to say it's suburban, but it's, smaller parcels, if you will, and just a ton more pressure because I'm just in a more populated area. I was like, if I find one mature deer a year on camera to try to hunt, I was like, I'm pretty lucky. When I say mature, like anything that's 4 or older, I was like, I'm usually pretty lucky. Like, so I guess talk to me a little bit about the areas that you're hunting and like, how prevalent are mature deer? How challenging is it to find mature deer? What are some of the obstacles to that?
Uh, it's pretty tough to find anything over 5.5 years of age
Mm-hmm.
around where I am. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's not many at all.
Yeah.
I, I think everyone I find I keep shooting at.
Right.
So,
Nice. Well,
but
that's a good problem to have, right? It's like,
yeah, yeah, I'm just having a little. I'm having good luck this year and bad luck at the same time because I did miss a couple.
oh, really?
So
Okay.
yeah, I was having some issues with my bow that I couldn't figure out for the longest time, but
Yeah.
I figured it out, and now she's hitting where she's supposed to again.
Right. Yeah.
So
And man, in some of those states too, like Jersey, PA, it's like, there's only but so many opportunities on a mature deer within a year, man. It can't be flinging those awry arrows too often, man. You run out of chances, right?
but I mean, I wound up missing 3 bucks over 150 inches this year,
Oh
so that
man.
wasn't good.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, it
good.
wasn't good at all.
No, that hurts, man.
Uh,
Like like I feel that pain.
yeah,
you
and
know.
all you could do was laugh. It was stupid issue. I had an issue with my rest on my bow,
Hmm.
and it was running one of those dropaways,
Hmm.
and it wasn't returning back perfect every time. So every time I returned, it wasn't always to where it was tuning my broadhead.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'd shoot it, and the thing wouldn't be hitting anywhere near where I was trying to aim.
Oh man.
So I got it all figured out now. So
So
I'm back in the game.
let's talk about that for a second, man, because sometimes, you know, like if a guy misses, they kind of unravel. They can, you know what I mean, unravel a little bit, like and shoot their confidence and stuff like that, and just kind of send them in a tailspin. Like, how do you deal with? I know that this was kind of like an equipment malfunction or whatever the case is, but nonetheless, it's like you put yourself in the right spot, and like I said previously, when you're hunting some of these high pressure states, you may not get a ton of opportunities like in a given year at a mature deer, and you really got to try to make them count. So how did you kind of come back from those misses and just kind of keep getting after it? Like I guess mentally most
Well,
specifically.
I used to get stressed about it when I was younger, but now it's just kind of like, oh, whatever. I'm not really like, I'm just having fun. I'm trying to just chase down the biggest deer around. And if I get one, I get one, but
Right.
it never really bothers me too much anymore.
Yeah, man.
It's just, you get enough deer under your belt, I guess you just kind of can shake it off.
Right.
Like
Yeah. It's I
when
think
when you're younger, trying to get one, oh man, it could be stressful. You pulling your hair out.
right, right. I think that's a good approach to have, man. Is that, you know, just what you said there is like you're just out having fun. And I think sometimes
Yeah,
people
it
forget
wasn't meant to be.
that's right, man. You know what I mean? It's it's like sometimes you eat the bear, sometimes the bear eats you. and
Yep.
and
You keep putting yourself in a high odds situation, eventually it's going to work.
right, exactly. And that's what I try to like, at least for me personally, I try to focus on that of like winning the chess match. Because I'm like, just what you said, it's like if I continue to win the chess match, like, you know, for example, this year I had two really good encounters with shooter bucks. Um, and, the one just wouldn't clear the brush to give me a shot. And the other one came at me head on. And by the time I knew that he was there, he came in so quiet that I couldn't get drawn because I didn't have any brush. I didn't have any cover between he and I, and in years past that might have ticked me off or it might have been like more mad about it than what I was, but I really just kind of laughed about it to be honest with you, the tree, because I was like, you gotta be kidding me. It's like if you would have told me this year I would have had like two encounters within 5 days, of deer that I knew of that I had on camera that were shooters, and I wasn't going to get a shot at either of them, like I would have told you you're crazy. You know what I
Yep.
mean? But it's like, oh, you
But
can.
I missed the same buck twice in one day. I
Nice.
missed him in the morning, and I got back on him in the afternoon, and I missed him again. So it happens.
that's that's right,
It
man.
ain't the end of the world.
That's right. And the thing is like the chess match you won, right? Like you were in the right spot, the right
Yeah.
time, like had it figured out. It's just sometimes the last component of it just doesn't go your way, whether it's equipment malfunction. I've missed my fair share as well, just on a bad shot, just where I just, rushed it or whatever, or it just doesn't take the two steps that you need to get you the opportunity. It's like that's the thing with bow hunting, man. It's like there's so many different things that have to line up for you to make it happen. That's to me, that's what makes it special. When it does happen, it's really, really special. Would you agree?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
No, that's why I do it.
for sure, man. So let's talk. Let's talk about the areas you're predominantly hunting. Like, talk to me a little bit about. I mentioned the states because you and I talked about it a little bit before we started recording. Like, I know PA, New Jersey, New York, Ohio. You're dabbling in now. Talk to me a little bit about the different types of habitat and terrain you're getting into those. Into in those different states.
Well, I'll chase a deer anywhere it lives if I can go there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll be hunting mountains. I'll hunt mountains. I'll hunt marshes around me. I'll hunt swamp, rolling hills. It don't matter if there's deer in it. I go for it. And luckily in New Jersey, you got everything.
Right.
So you got New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York right here. There's so many different terrain types. It's crazy.
So do you have a different approach to those different terrain types? Like, do you have to slightly kind of, I don't know, approach them differently? Because I know, at least for me, it's where I live, it's like I definitely have some swamp. I've got some, I wouldn't say mountain, but hill country. But then I do go to some areas where I'm hunting mountains, and I always have to I don't want to say recalibrate, right? But it's like, just for instance, like I know my thermal is going to react way differently, in like the swamp areas versus whenever I get into the mountains. I know that, my wind is going to react differently just based on, having topography versus not having topography and things like that. Like, talk to me a little bit about that. Like, how do you kind of account for those things? And do you have, is there anything that you do differently in those different scenarios?
I target certain terrains depending on the time of the year very often.
Okay.
Like early season, I'll focus more on marsh and like low-lying swampland and stuff like that. Where like, cause like, like earlier in the year, you got to get closer to those deer to get them up and moving, so in that kind of terrain where the deer can't see and it's all cover-based bedding and stuff like that, you can get a lot closer to them with that cover on the ground. So you can get in closer and get into opportunities at daylight shots when they're getting up out of bed and stuff like that. Nice. And then like closer in towards like the rut, I'll switch over towards the mountains and I'll hunt those deer.
Right.
So I'm trying to pick a terrain that's actually going to give me like some kind of advantage for setting up on them.
Right. And that makes sense with like the obviously you have the thicker cover and stuff like that in and around the swamps and stuff like that. And, can they can't see quite as well, so you can get in a little closer.
Yep.
And then when you get to like the mountains or hill country or whatever for rut, you're now really kind of focusing on like they're now moving, and so now you're trying to use. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing you're trying to use that terrain now to predict or dictate how they're going to want to move. Essentially, is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, and they seem to be more aggressive up in the mountains, laying down sign that time of year. I find so like it's a little easier to track them around and stuff like that.
Right.
Up in the mountains, because
Right.
like early season mountains, it's like hit or miss. You can even find good tracks sometimes.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting.
you know,
The other thing I kind of learned too, man, it's interesting you said swamps are so like with just like the thick cover, because I didn't notice it until I was in Kansas there a couple weeks ago. Because I was hunting on the ground a lot, and I was hunting a lot in like CRP ground and stuff like that. Like,
yep. All that stuff.
yeah,
That stuff's fun.
yeah, it is. It was a lot of fun. But what I kind of learned, well, I learned a ton, I should say, just hunting from the ground almost exclusively the entire trip. But the one thing I picked up, and what you just said made me think of it, is that I was really surprised by how much less I could hear when I was on the ground in that CRP, because that grass and
Yep.
stuff that was around me was actually acting as a buffer to the noise that was around me. So if there was a deer approaching, I really couldn't hear it. But if I was in a tree, I could hear it. So that, like that,
Yep.
it really kind of
All
muffles.
go, like, right on you.
Yeah, yeah. And so what you just said made a lot of sense to me, because you can almost use that thick cover to your advantage, where, I know a deer hears better than we do, but
Yep.
they're also going to,
and they can't hear anything.
right. Like you can get away with a little bit more sound whenever they're bedded in that stuff, because they're going to have the same issue of that sound, of that foliage being a barrier to the sound for them as well. Right.
Yep, exactly. That's it. When I'm hunting those marshes in the early season, it's not uncommon for the deer to get up 60, 70 yards from me when they get up and start moving out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you can't do that up in the mountains. The deer see it coming for 200 yards in some places. You know,
right.
So you got to set up on those deer when they're moving far enough.
Right. And they can probably hear you too, just because it's so much more open, relatively speaking, it's more open.
Yeah.
And
just travels through all those bottoms and comes up. You can hear people getting out of their car and going hunting when you're in the hills.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So the deer are hearing the same thing. They hear the rocks popping going down the road, and they're like, "Oh, here they come."
Yeah.
And before you even get out of the car, they're already gone.
Right. Exactly.
Or they're sitting up over the roadway watching you, and they're going, "All right, where's he going to go this time?"
Right. Yeah. I've definitely found that, where I found just like hammer sign off of like parking lots and stuff, like little overlooked areas where it's like, or a deer's bedded not far off of a parking lot or an access route or whatever. They're just watching people walk by, because,
yep.
I
see that.
Go ahead.
I said, I see that in Ohio a lot.
Oh, do you?
When I'm out. Oh man, it's everywhere like that. They're just sitting right over the top of the roads watching you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, those, especially those mature deer, man, if they've got a hidey hole, you can almost walk on top of them before they'll get up. It's
yeah. Those big bucks are a completely different animal, how they think about that stuff. So it just makes it real rough. That's why nobody shoots them.
Yeah. That's why they're hard to kill. They act different. You know what I mean? It's like, I've heard, all the different guys that I've had on this show, over the however many years I've been doing this, it's the one thing that I always kind of consistently hear from them is like, when you're hunting mature deer, they are a different type of whitetail than the rest of the herd that you see. They act differently. They're more cautious. They sometimes they have a lot more nerve and will withstand pressure because they've got a spot that they're just kind of like beholden to. And then they say also sometimes, I'd be curious what your kind of take is on this. Like, I've also heard at some points where they say that actually, like, the older the deer gets, if you know where he's at, he becomes somewhat easier to kill because they become more reclusive. Now, they're going to move less in daylight potentially, but the area in which they're going to move becomes smaller as they get older in a lot of cases. So if you know where he's at, you have a lot better chance of kind of killing him. He's just not going to give you a whole lot of opportunities in daylight to do it. Do you kind of find
Yeah,
do you
you
see
have a
that?
lot of chance closer to him, but killing him is the other part.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because he'll be in that area, but you got to figure out what everybody else isn't doing in
Right.
order to get on him. You know, because he's probably doesn't have too many kinks in his armor at that point.
Right.
So
That's a
it's
good
real tough to figure out. Sometimes you're better off with those big bucks to just blow them out and figure out where the heck they are, and then go back in for them.
Right. Is that something you do relatively frequently? Like, I don't want to say a bump and dump, but something similar to that, where you're just kind of like,
Oh,
let me kick him out so I can kind of figure out what he's doing.
if I can't figure it out and I'm not sure where he is, I'll blow him out.
Yeah.
But I try to. I try to like catch him off guard the first time around. But if I get stumped on a deer, I'll just go for it. And if I blow him out, then I know where he is, then he's got an issue. But other than that,
Right.
like you're just guessing.
So
I don't like.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You said you don't like what?
I don't like guessing.
Right.
I like to know where he is.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, man. Before we move into like more, habitat terrain kind of stuff, like how are you using trail cameras just like in general? Like, I guess talk to me a little bit about how you're gathering your inventory. I mean, are you using them to help make kind of in-season decisions to a degree, or are you using them kind of exclusively for inventory, during the summer? And then once you kind of know who's in the area, you're kind of good to go.
I do inventory in the summer mostly with cameras, kind of get a handle on what deer are in the area and if there's one I want to shoot or not that year. Because there's some places I won't go back into for several years because there's just not a big enough buck in there for me.
Right.
So I just kind of back and wait. But if like say I got a spot up in Pennsylvania where I've been working out the last 2 years, and like this year I didn't even really hunt it too much because I was focused on some real big ones back home. But I was like, I'll just throw some cameras up there. I think I put 20 cameras up there, and I just have them sitting there soaking, and I'll just see what kind of deer are moving through and different times of the season and stuff, what comes through, and kind of get a handle on the pattern up there.
Right.
But usually I'll let them soak during the season and never check them, and then I'll run inventory in the summer. But once I know there's a big one in the area, I don't really put any more cameras out for them because being where you got that camera in September or October is not very good. So you're usually going to have to start over anyway.
Right.
So I don't even let that get me excited anymore. I'll just put the camera out. That's a good one. All right, now I got to figure out where he went because he could be 2 miles from where I got him on camera.
Right. Yeah. That's the painful part, right? It's like, I've had that happen way too many times where I've gotten excited about a deer and then lost him and then ended up not being able to find him and, or got killed or whatever the case is. It's like I still kind of use cameras over during the season, really only over, primary scrape areas is really the only place that I'll bank on any type of inventory to use in season to a degree. But otherwise, it's kind of similarly. I just want to know kind of who's in the area. I've also done the same thing you're doing in a different piece in Pennsylvania where I hunted it once this year. I had some big deer on camera that were definitely, huntable. After this, I'll text you some pictures, but it was one of those things where I haven't spent enough time in that spot yet to really even venture a guess as to what they might be doing. I really just took this year to qualify the piece and say, am I in an area that holds like good deer or not? And so the answer was yes. So now this year, this off season, it'll be, all right, now let me put my time in, and figure out, can I figure out where they're daylighting now? Let me kind of expand my scouting, beyond these areas and see if I can't figure out what might make sense as far as like how they're, what they might be doing from a daylight perspective in October or November. Do you kind of follow a similar kind of pattern or a similar train of thought?
Yeah, I'll just throw them out and figure them out a little bit. I don't get crazy on it.
Right.
I run a lot because my daughter likes looking at the pictures too.
Right. There you go.
So she loves looking at the pictures, so I'll do it mostly. A lot of times I'll do it for that, but
Right. Nice.
you know, they didn't always have cameras, and I didn't always use them, so
Yeah, it's nice whenever you when you're able to kind of make a plan with like allow them to like assist you and not be the full picture, so to speak. I think a lot of people use them as like the end all be all, as opposed to like it's just one piece of information.
yeah. And the thing you got to remember with those cameras too is they're doing damage at the same time. You know,
Right.
I've had spots you put a camera in there and you're like, why is this buck gone? You know, and you're like, you're thinking he's not on camera anymore, but then you physically go up there and you track that deer through the area and you realize you walked around your camera.
Yeah.
So you think he's not there, but he's actually right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've seen that with a couple deer. The 158-inch buck I shot last year was like that. He just avoided cameras.
Really?
You know? And then the buck I shot this year, I tracked him probably following his rut circuit around that mountain. I tracked him on wet leaves probably 5.5, 6 miles in a circuit, you know, over like a course of a day. And that deer walked past probably 15 cameras and he didn't walk in front of one of them. He'd literally walk almost to the camera and then he'd veer around the back of it. So, I mean, they do stuff like that. And you ever get one on camera looking at your camera, then you got to go, uh-oh.
Right.
That's not.
Yeah, he's on to you at that point. It's interesting because I had one this year early in the summer. It was a really good deer, and I got a picture of him on a different camera, you know, later in the summer into the fall. I don't know. He was probably in like somewhere between like 130 and 140 inches, I would guess. Like early in the year, I thought he was going to be bigger than he ended up being. Still a good buck. He's 4-year-old. But the first picture I got of him on that first camera, he was looking directly in it, and I never got another one of him in that spot.
Yeah, put a camera on the back of the tree.
What's that?
I said put a camera on the back side of the tree.
Right. Yeah, I've started hanging double sets for that reason, where it's like I know I'm missing some stuff, and I know certain deer are still there. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah. So, man, I want to talk a little bit.
That's the amazing thing you see with those deer when if you get a chance to follow them like late season in the snow, and you follow deer around, how they like go and wind check ladder stands and stuff like that before they go past them. It's amazing watching them go through an area.
That's interesting, man. Like I need to do that at some point. I do that every now and then. I'll go out and I'll just follow tracks in the snow. I mean, we had enough snow last year to do it, so I did some of it last year. But I even just like watching. You know, this was like a bad scenario, but it was one of the hunts in Kansas where I had snort wheezed a buck into a decoy, and you know, like clockwork, like he was coming in, he hit worked a scrape real quick, and he was on his way in, and then not at the last second, but like he just kind of stopped and was like, all right, I'm gonna go to the downwind side, and you could just see him like, and I was like, I knew I had like very small margin of error to try to stick him. And I had like 0 wind that day to help me out. And he was going into this little bottom where I knew my thermals were dropping. And I was like, I might get the 3 steps that I need to kill him, but it's not looking good. And, just a smart deer, he was like, I'm going to go check out who this joker is real quick before I commit to trying to kick his ass, and
if I blind call or do any kind of call, and I always try to set up where the deer has no way he could possibly circle around me.
Yeah. Exactly.
Put myself up a big bluff or body of water or something like that. You know? And if I don't have something like that, I don't even call.
Yeah, this setup was, I went into it, I saw it on the map, and I'd never been in it. And so, and I wanted to kind of sit up in like this little bit of CRP. It wasn't like a bluff, but it was just like the CRP field dropped down into this creek bottom. And I wanted to just really go set up for the morning so I could see and have just a little bit of elevation so I could see the other side of the creek bottom, essentially. I just wanted to be able to see across it. And it wasn't wide. It's maybe only 60 yards wide. but I wanted to be able to see across it at first light. That way I could kind of assess. And I knew I was going to be on the ground for the day. You know what I mean? And I really just wanted to kind of get a lay of the land. That way, as I got first light, I could kind of make my way in and find like the setup that I wanted to kind of use for the day or whatever. Well, my plans got foiled because right at first light, I had a doe behind me at 5 yards. She never knew that I was there. I was in like a ghillie jacket in the middle of this CRP. And I set up with like this little kind of like drop off behind me, but I couldn't see really anything else like when I got in there. And the whole morning from like first light to like 9 o'clock, I just had deer all on top of me to where I could not move. Like they were just like every time one would leave, another one would come in. And that buck came in as the second deer and he wanted to walk away. And I was like, well, I'm not letting him walk away without trying to get a shot at him. And I had a decoy out. And so I snort wheezed him back, hoping that he would see that decoy and just be pissed off enough to where he would just want to come in straight to that decoy, you know, and get sideways, you know, bristle up and want to fight. And I thought that'll be where my shot opportunity is. I was like, either one or two things are going to happen. Either that's going to happen or he's going to be curious and try to circle downwind. And if he does that, I'm going to be screwed. And I was screwed. So, but.
Yep. It's usually the one that you're like, yep, that's going to screw me. That's the one they're going to do.
Right. Exactly. I was just hoping. I was like, man, it's the third week of November. Like he should still be, you know, he should be trying to find, you know, one of the last remaining does like in this cycle that could be that, you know, is ready to breed. And so he might be willing to just throw down, you know, and not throw caution to the wind and be ready to fight, you know, and that's what I was kind of hoping for and just didn't work out. But man, you know, we talked about the states you're hunting in. Those are some high pressure states, man. You know, you're dealing with a lot of hunting pressure. I know, cause you know, I'm dealing with a lot of it too around here. How are you kind of managing around that hunting pressure to find these mature deer? You know, cause you know, it's just, I go into the timber, man, and like there's flagging tape everywhere, there's bright eyes everywhere, there's tree stands everywhere, you know, and you know, there's some ways you can find, you know, little pockets where mature deer want to kind of lay, but how are you kind of hunting around the pressure or using the pressure or avoiding it in general?
Well, every time I find a stand, I do mark it so I know where it is in the area. But it doesn't always necessarily mean that it's bad.
Right.
Because every place you check is going to have a tree stand. You know, it seems like sometimes like every place that you would think there would be a deer is going to have a stand laying in it. And that's when I really fall back on kind of physically following that hot sign and getting on those tracks, because that deer is going to lead you to where he is during the day, you know, so regardless of the pressure in the area, if the deer is going over there to lay down that day, that's where you're going to have to go over there to kill them.
Right.
So it's I don't even let it bother me anymore. If there's 12 cars parked at the parking lot, it doesn't even bother me.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to a buddy about that. We were kind of joking. I was like, man, if you're from New Jersey or Pennsylvania and you get discouraged when you see flagging tape tree stands or cars in the parking lot, like you ain't ever going to get out of the truck. You know,
yeah,
I was like,
spot to go.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You know, and I think there's something to being able to use the pressure too, like to your advantage. You know, it's like I have a spot, you know, I'm sure you probably have experienced this too, but I'd be curious if you have, where, you know, I've found little hidey holes based on other people's access that they were pushing deer into into specific areas, and that there was some really challenging access to get into that spot that I was able to find a way to get in clean. And when I did that, it was like that spot was on fire. Like every year now, it's like it's that way.
Everybody else is hunting that deer's right under everybody's nose, but you're just accessing on a different angle than everybody else, so the deer doesn't see it coming.
Yeah,
and that's all it takes sometimes, just something stupid.
Right. Yeah. So
you know, if everybody's doing that, you do the complete opposite.
Right. So what's your access look like for most places? I mean, you know, are you, you know, because there's two kind of schools of thought, I guess maybe is one way to kind of put it. You know, there are some places where I will use the access everybody else is using because that might be the only way to kind of start in, and it's already kind of busted because everyone's using this access. So I'm not going to go dirty up another spot to get into an area. You know, I might just use it part of the way and then, you know, kind of dive off into whatever direction I need to be going in. And then there's the approach of like, using water access and stuff like that. Like, what kind of ways are you kind of using access to your advantage that might be, a little bit different?
Well, I got a canoe and I got a lot of worn out pairs of shoes, and I'll just if I can get a water access, that's great. If I have a spot like that, I love using like river systems or anything like that. I got a little lightweight canoe to get in, solo canoe.
Mm-hmm.
But if I like, I just usually like I'll walk a 2 mile circle to hunt 100 yards off the road if I have to.
Right.
I do goofy stuff like that, and that seems to be what's getting me there. You're like, oh yeah, well, to get to where I want to go from the parking lot is only 15 minutes, but if I walk up this mountain and walk a big circle and then cut back down towards the road, it's going to take me over an hour to access it, but I'll get in there clean.
Right.
I'll do stuff like that all the time.
Right.
It's a pain in the butt, and you're like, what am I doing? Because you're taking this huge loop and setting up next to the parking lot or something stupid like that, or if you get like you just drive past, you see a good spot where the deer is going to be laying on the side of the hill or something on the road, you just drive right past, don't even pay attention, go park a quarter mile down the road, and then walk back.
Right.
Get in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always just those attention to detail things, like you're saying, putting in that effort where, yeah, it might only be 100 yards off the road, but if you can't just walk up the side of the ridge or whatever without them knowing that you're there, then it's not a good spot if you do that anymore, right? It's
Yeah. I usually do best hunting blind in
Okay.
places. I'll hunt blind going into them. Kind of like both of the bucks this year. I never really hunted those two pieces before.
Okay.
I knew there was good bucks in the area, but I didn't. Beyond that, I didn't really know much. So I was checking night sign down by like fields and stuff to see where the deer were, to see like get a gauge on how big the bucks were in the area and stuff, and then I would just backtrack my way into them, And it was I take a lot of time scouting on the off season,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm learning buck beds and flagging stuff and flagging deer sign, but it's not necessarily that I'm going back to hunt it the following year even.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand why it's there and when it's there.
Okay.
So when I get to a situation and I look at it, I can go, okay, yeah, this would make sense why this deer would go here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll just go in and get on him before he has any clue that anybody's hunting him in that spot.
Right. So when you go in blind to some of these places, how are you approaching that? Because that's one of my favorite ways to hunt. To be honest, is going into a place that I've not really been before, and it's something really that I've picked up from John Eberhart, because he does a lot. I shouldn't say he does a lot of that, but he's done a fair amount of that in his life, and he has kind of a process or an approach, and I follow a lot of what he does from that perspective. But when you go in blind, like, how are you? It sounds like you're, trying to cut a track or cut some sign early somewhere that's not intrusive, and then kind of working your way back from there. But how are you determining where you're going to set up? Like, what type of sign are you looking for that's going to kind of make you stop and say, "Yep, this is the setup point"?
Typically, the deer that I've been killing recently with the age class have been a lot of deer coming out of beds. Even like closer to the rut, they're still coming out of beds. Like that big buck I shot this year, he was bedded 3/4 of a mile from the does.
Hmm.
And that deer wasn't coming over to where the party was until after dark.
Right.
And I swear that deer was probably chasing does and then going back to his bed every time the sun came up.
Right.
Are
you seeing that? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say, are you seeing just like historically? Because that's interesting that, because I've had two people that I know have killed deer during the rut actually bed hunting. Because the classic kind of rule is like a lot of people, will hunt beds early in the year, September if you have an earlier opener and, in through October, and then whenever you hit that kind of like, I don't know, like around the last week of October, right? Like they start to really kind of move, and then maybe bed hunting may not be as effective at that point. A lot of guys will start to switch their strategies to more kind of rut-based tactics, where it's like they're looking for pinches and travel corridors and things like that, where deer are going to want to pass through and stuff like that. But with what you basically said, and you mentioned age class, and I think that's the important piece. I know my buddy Chad I was with in Kansas killed a giant in Kansas, and he killed it on his exit trail out of his bed, during the rut, of course.
Yep.
Killed him at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Last year,
Yep.
my buddy Jake Bush was having a rough year hunting the rut and was just getting beat up. And he finally, and he's a big time bed hunter, and he was just finally like, you know what, screw it. I'm going back. I know where this guy has been bedding. Like during the year, I'm going to go back and hunt his bed that he uses, that he likes for this wind, and killed that buck, coming out of his bed in the evening.
Yep.
And these are mature deer. And so are you seeing more consistently like those mature deer that you can still successfully kind of bed hunt them even during the rut, because they're not playing the reindeer games like the younger bucks are, like the 2 and 3 year olds are?
Yeah, exactly. If you want to kill the biggest, oldest, smartest deer in your block of woods, that's pretty much what you're going to have to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to kill 125, 130 inch 3.5-year-olds, you can set up for more traditional rut kind of setups. But if you're targeting 5.5 plus whitetails on public land that gets pounded, there's no other way to really do it. Like the amount of times that deer is vulnerable throughout the season is so low. Like you have to put yourself in his core in order to get on him.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting because, a lot of folks will kind of throw out, look, I'm not saying in certain areas, like people kill giants every year hunting, using rut tactics and stuff like that. So I'm not saying that it can't be done. Plenty of people prove me wrong with that. But I've just personally seen it the past 2 years and then heard you say it. And it's made me kind of rethink essentially how I hunt the rut to a degree. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's boring.
Right.
I'll tell you that. It's boring. I don't see many deer.
Right.
Like this year, like I saw 6 shooters, I think, and all 6 of them were in bow range.
Right.
And that was pretty much like I wasn't seeing little bucks or does or anything.
Right.
I'm just focusing on those big deer,
mm-hmm.
and they tend to just not want to be around the other deer, like even during the rut. And I think Thompson from Spartan Forge, he was even saying on the one podcast that some of those big bucks don't even participate in the rut.
Right.
So,
yeah.
I mean, you got some of these deer that are radio collared that don't participate in your rut that's 6.5, 7.5 years old. I mean, that's the ones I want to shoot.
Right.
But if they're not participating in the rut, there's no sense hunting them like they're in the rut.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it just kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, is that they can be easier to kind of figure out where their area is. Cause if you know where their area is, they're probably not going to be far from it. But like you said, at that
Mm-hmm.
point in their life, they don't have a lot of chinks in their armor for you to, they're not going to make a lot of mistakes, essentially, put it that way.
Yep. Well, that buck I killed this year, he was 6.5 years old from the tooth wear. I'll know for sure once I send in the incisors.
Mm-hmm.
But that deer, after I killed him, I got a picture of that deer from a trail camera that a guy had him on trail camera. And I asked him, I'm like, where did you have that trail camera? And sure enough, he had that trail camera in August, 100 yards from where I killed that deer.
That's
so
interesting.
that deer during the rut was living in the same place he was living in August.
Right.
And he was just one of those hermit bucks. I mean, when I tracked that deer up, the sign was so heavy around where the does were and everything, but that's where all the other hunting pressure was at the same time. And I followed that deer 1.5 miles back up into the mountains, and middle of nowhere, no other deer sign. He's got a scrape line up there by by his like core bedding area
Mm-hmm.
with just his tracks in it. There's no other deer around in the woods.
Hmm.
It was just out there by himself.
Hmm.
And that deer literally get up and walk all the way out every night to where all the action was. But I really think he was just returning before the sun came up and just getting back in there.
Do you find, especially in the mountains, because this is something I'm always kind of curious about, do you find that mature bucks in the mountains will stay close or in their summer area more consistently than deer in other habitat types?
It depends on the deer.
Okay.
Some bucks will, and they will just never leave a certain spot. And then there's some bucks that move all year round and are completely nomadic when they're that age. Right. And I have a couple bucks that I've been hunting the last couple of years like that too, that are really big bucks. I mean, huge bucks, and they just constantly moving and shifting. They never hang out in the same place more than 1 or 2 days, and they're gone.
Right.
And I've had one deer that I glassed up with my daughter this summer in fields 6 miles from where I found that deer in the wintertime the year before. And I seen that deer the year before that, like 4 miles from that in the opposite direction on a ridge line. And it's the same buck, but he's always moving around and shifting. And like he'll get off the public land and travel miles and go over to some spot over on private. And I think he'll hide there in daylight. And I think he'll get up and come back into the public at night and check some places. But then he's just completely elusive a lot of times, and he's just constantly shifting. And I got on him last year. I almost killed him, but it was late season January with the bow, and I had a couple hot does that went in the estrus in the one area I was hunting, and he showed up 4 days in a row. But other than that, it was the only window I had at that deer.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy because I mean, I've seen it both ways, like kind of what you're saying, where it's like I've seen it, it really the reason why I was asking the question is because there's a piece of big woods here in PA that I'm hunting, and like it's just the way the habitat is you either have deer habitat in certain areas, and that in deer will be in those areas, and then you'll just have areas in large areas that just, I mean, there's nothing there for a deer that they would ever want, and so it's very almost like they kind of like live and exist in pockets. And so my hypothesis this year when I was running cameras and like getting my summer inventory, is I was like, man, if I were to bet, because there's not great browse everywhere, and because these does aren't going to necessarily live in like all these different places where there isn't adequate food and stuff like that, I felt like these bucks weren't going to disperse nearly as much as I would see maybe in like ag country or places that have a lot more structure, so to speak, you know what I mean? And that held true for some of them. There was a few of them that stuck around through the fall, but a lot of them were just as nomadic as the ones that I hunt in Southern Ohio, where it's just like, I mean, they'll bed down in the middle of the freaking wide open woods. I've seen them do that, where it's just like, yep, just got tired. I'm going to lay down here, and like, you're like, I mean, I'm sure there's a reason why they're bedded there, but like, I can't think of why.
Yeah. The thing is, you're looking at it and you're like, oh, there's not great food. There's no clear cuts around this area or anything, but there's food. But there's not enough food for a lot of deer, but there's enough food for 1 or 2 deer. So that big buck, he's got enough food in that area to survive. Mm-hmm. And some of those deer will rather risk starving to death than going over there with all the other deer.
Right. So what type of food are you looking for in those kind of instances? And that's, I think I mentioned this as we were getting ready to kick off, because man, I was getting an education from you this summer where you were sending me pictures of like all different types of browse and flowers and stuff like that you look for when you're scouting, to kind of know that like, okay, here are like I guess I'll call them like secondary food sources, right? Where it's like they'll either use them as like a transition area before they hit whatever the primary food is, or in the case of a reclusive old buck, that might be their primary food so they can just stay out of trouble, essentially. So what type of
Yep.
stuff are you looking for whenever it comes to those secondary food types?
I'm looking for a lot of like herbaceous plants, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of they call them forbs,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just there's not like any like specific gold mine
Mm-hmm.
for that kind of stuff, but you got to target the habitat they grow in, which is going to be like bottoms,
Mm-hmm.
like low swampy spots and stuff like that. You get those big meadows growing up there in the big woods. Like you get some beaver swamps or something where beavers came in and
Dam
choked
some
up
things up. Yeah.
little river system, and then the dam broke, and then you get all those that grass is growing out there and stuff like that. And then a lot of deer they really rely on fern roots and a couple other lily species
Mm-hmm.
that grow around those wet spots in the hills and in the mountains. You get those natural springs that come up on the sides of the ridges and stuff. Those will produce certain forbs like that, and that they're digging for roots in the winter, and they're eating the flowers and stuff like that in the summer. But it's a lot of bulbs, a lot of little lily species, that stuff that you wouldn't even like think, and then that's what they're hitting. But then if you look nutritionally at what those plants produce, they're better than most food plots for palatability. So they're producing high calcium and high sodium content. So it's actually really good for the deer.
Right. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned fern bulbs because that was one thing. Like I mean, I knew that they would munch on ferns because whether it's Johnny Stewart or whatever, my buddies that hunt out around like the Alleghenies and stuff like that, and I kind of knew like, hey, if I'm in a spot that has ferns, like they'll certainly certainly eat this stuff. And then I was with my buddy Aaron Hepler, and one of his things for finding sheds in the off season is he goes to places where there's a lot of ferns and just looks for where they're scratching because they'll be digging, and that digging will shake their head, of course, as they're pawing, and will a lot of times will kind of jostle their antlers loose, and he'll find a pile of antlers in those kind of areas with a bunch of ferns.
Yep, I picked up 26 sheds in Pennsylvania doing that last year.
Really,
just focusing on those fern bulbs, and then I'm looking at patches like laurel that the deer could hide in winter. And last year with that deep snow, they didn't move much. I mean, those deer literally lived in a 20-yard circle in their bed all day. Like you get up on these little like knolls and stuff choked in mountain laurel, and there'll be probably 200, 300 piles of shit sitting right there on the hill.
Yeah.
Just sitting in one spot, and they're sitting there walking in circles. And then you go down to like a little drainage or something, and they'll be where they're digging. You walk down there, and sure enough, you pull up an antler.
Right.
And that's all they were doing. And they were doing that last year from the beginning of December all the way through until spring.
So you just mentioned drainages there for a second. I'm glad you brought it up because I almost forgot because I wanted to ask you about that. So in some of these big woods places, do you, and this is coming from, I know Joe Dasick, right? If I'm not mistaken. Yep. Yeah. Because I just had Joe on
he's
here.
Like
What's that?
I said he's like my apprentice.
Yeah. He's Joe's good. He's good people, man. I just had him on, and we were talking because he and I are, he's a Pennsylvania guy, and we hunt some very similar kind of topography and stuff like that. And he was mentioning drainages, as like a, as this one area that I've been exploring, like as a place to kind of focus on. Now, are drainages something that you like to kind of, when you go to a new area? Say I took Paul to a new area and a big piece of big woods, kind of mountain country. And you started looking at the map and stuff like that. Are those drainages some places that you start to kind of hone in on and pinpoint, as places to kind of start?
Absolutely. I'll get right in on those drainages, and I'll look for bowls.
Okay.
Drainages and bowls. That's like the key right there.
Is it the top of the drainage at the top of the elevation, or is it the bottom?
They're living like mid level a lot of times
Okay.
in that stuff. They'll live like they don't always live right in the drainage. Sometimes they do,
Mm-hmm.
but they'll kind of skirt off the side of the drainage and get on a little shelf or something out there on the side in a thick patch of cover.
Okay.
You know, and then if it's hot out, they tend to favor the northern and eastern drainages, and if it's cold out, they go to the south side over there,
Right.
like the southwestern, where they're going to get in the sun. And I'll use Cal Topo, and I'll get that sun exposure. You could set Cal Topo to sun exposure, and you can actually see where the sun is hitting the sides of those, and you can see the sun exposure on those drains and kind of figure out where the deer are going to be laying in those spots.
All right.
But it seems like a lot of the big bucks really like working those drainages because it's a thermal hub for them.
Right.
You know, so they're always getting that good air current, so they're safe, and they'll just travel right through them.
And so you just mentioned with that sun hitting the ground thing, so that's where Joe got that from. Because we were talking about that, and he said, a lot of times he'll like to hang. He mentioned, that being a thermal hub, of course, because thermals are going to dump down into those drainages and stuff. He said a lot of times he'll want to set cameras in and around areas where he's getting good sun hitting the ground in those drainages. And so that must have been something he kind of picked up from you, is kind of looking at what that exposure looks like.
Yeah. Yep. You'll work up and down those drainages, and you'll find like signpost rubs where bucks are coming down and meeting up in certain points on it, or you'll find scrapes and stuff like that. Nice. And I like focusing on that stuff, but it's difficult to hunt it because they're in there for a reason, you know. So you got to really time your stuff out. Like a lot of times I'll like get close to it when I set up in them, but I won't go all the way in until I feel that thermal shift, and then I'll go up the last distance and then set up.
Okay.
Nice. So I did a lot. I spend like 95% of my time on my feet, kind of slowly getting into places and kind of reading the sign and just working into them. And then like once I get there and I feel like I'm good, then I'll wait till the thermals are shifting or the wind currents are getting right, and then I'll move up that last distance.
Okay.
Because those bucks are sitting in a spot where they're going to wind you if you try to get close to them. So you got to wait. You got to kind of wait, and if they come down too soon, it's he wasn't going to work that day, you know. But right. you just got to time it.
Right. I'm guessing that if they're like if you do your off-season scouting and you can kind of figure out where the sign's getting laid down, you can probably get a good idea whether they're living top, middle, or low part of that drainage, and then look at what you were saying, like the sun exposure, and then think about what that weather potentially is during that time of year that you might want to go hunt it, right? I guess would be one way to look at it. And then it probably can help you figure out how you need to access it, because I would imagine if they're living in the middle, you certainly don't want to access from the top, right? Especially in the morning. I guess it would depend on whether it's a morning, afternoon, or evening.
Most of the time I'm hunting drains, I'm coming in like probably 3:00.
Okay.
And then I'll get up, and I won't get into them until that sun drops over and shadows it and starts that thermal pull.
Okay.
Where it starts dropping, you know, and a lot of those setups you can't hunt them in the morning.
Right.
There's no way around it. You can't hunt them in the morning. It doesn't work.
Right.
So a lot of times I'll just spend the morning kind of looking for a buck, you know, looking for the hottest sign for a buck going into one of those drainages from the bottom. You know, I'll get in the woods at like gray light, and then once I can see really good and pick track up, then I'll just kind of hover around down way on the bottom where I'm not affecting anything, and just kind of wait till I pick something up. And then once I have a good idea where that deer is, then I'll just work my way up to go kill him.
Right. What, So let me ask you this, man. I'll just ask it straightforward. Do you prefer morning or evening hunts? And like what do you kind of prefer?
I kill majority of my deer between midday and and probably like an hour before dark
Okay.
is when I kill most of mine.
Okay. Interesting. Do
Yeah.
you do you not like mornings in general, or do you follow like the no mornings in October, or do you just kind of, if you know there's a deer somewhere and you need to kill him, and you just go whenever when the time's right?
Yeah, if I can access a spot in the morning and it's a dynamite spot to get in the morning, I'll hunt it.
Right.
But if I don't have good access to get in the morning and I just risk pushing that deer, I don't go.
Right.
I'll just hold back. I rather spend my time scouting early in the morning and then figuring out a setup,
Hmm.
But I mean, I'll kill them in the morning too. It's just they got to be bulletproof access points. That's where if I'm hunting with like water access, then morning hunts can be awesome. If you have like water access or something,
Right.
then they make a lot of sense because you can get in really clean.
Yeah.
But I'm so worried about a buck coming in and catching my ground scent coming in, and then
Right.
completely change plan for the day. Even if he catches your ground scent a half a mile from there, he might not end up going to where you wanted him to go.
Right.
He might go a different pitch over and set up for his bed or something. So I'm like super critical about getting in
Right.
early.
What
And if I get in early, I like to get in super early, way before anything's in the woods.
Okay. Like how early, like how long before sunup are you in your tree, or are you in your setup?
Probably an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes.
Damn. Yeah. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
lot.
I mean you're
That's a
waking
lot.
up at like 1 in the morning
Yeah.
sometimes to get up to your spot.
Yeah. That's a lot of
But
nap time in the tree for me. I've perfected my saddle nap setup for those early mornings when I got to get in early. I've got that on lockdown now. But
yep, I'll go in there and I'll hang all my stuff and then I'll just lay underneath the tree and go to sleep.
yeah. Nice. Catch a little siesta.
Sleep on the log or something.
Yeah, exactly. Well, man, I want to jump to this hunt you had for this buck this past year. Like I want to talk about that. That was an October kill, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Which one?
I think it was the first one you sent me.
Yep. The first one that was a 4.5-year-old 130-inch 10 pointer. That one was the last week of October.
Okay. And
Yep.
so was that like how did that kind of all come together? Was it an area that you found in your off-season scouting, or was it an area where you just kind of cut a track and went in because you found a track and was like, "Yep, I'm going to go try to extract this deer." What was the approach on this one?
I located that deer with my daughter glassing fields in the summer in like August.
Mhm.
And I knew he was in the area. I was like, all right, I'll shoot that one. That's a good buck to shoot. So I went from there. That deer, from where he was in those beans, me and my daughter started hiking the woods up around there, and we relocated that deer a mile and a half from there in September.
Hmm.
And then I started hunting that deer in early October for the first week or so. I hunted that deer, but then he shifted for the rut another like mile and 3/4 down the mountain to another location that had a lot more does in it.
Mhm.
And so I wound up having to go from there to relocate that buck into that new section. And from there, I worked him out. And I went in there for that deer the first time I really put in effort to scout for him and figure out where he was. I went in and right before it was like a drizzling rain.
Mhm.
And I spent the whole day scouting it, knowing that there was going to be torrential downpours and at dark that day. So I kind of just went in the spot and blew it all up and just figured out everything, that whole deer circuit through that area, and like where he was checking different doe groups and stuff like that. And basically I figured everything out. I walked miles and miles and miles that day checking spots, and I determined where he was bedding, kind of like he was like bedding in like a central location from all different doe groups in the area to get quick access to check all the does. And I found him bedding on one point that was overwatching a hiking trail. So once I understood where that deer was bedding, I never physically went in to the bed 100%, but I found the rub lines coming out from that point in multiple directions.
Okay.
So, and then basically I went back in the next day and went in there around like 2:30. I had enough aid that the thermals were switching for me to set up on that deer for that wind, because that deer was coming out wind to his nose when I shot him, but I was just set up right with the thermal so he couldn't smell me off that point. And he basically came in. I was in a tree for like 45 minutes and he came in and I shot him.
Damn. That's pretty good, man. Like just figuring him out like that. So so essentially were you using kind of the rub lines to like understand like what his exit trail was and setting up on his exit from his bed, I assume?
Yeah, pretty much. And I just I took for granted the deer was probably going to be leaving wind to his nose most of the time.
Right.
And if he didn't, it was probably going to be, he won't be going far enough for me to see him. So right. I figured when the deer has the wind in their favor, they tend to travel farther. So I usually try to set up where the deer thinks he's good with the wind, but he's not, because I found this little chink in the armor or something.
Right.
To get him.
Yeah. So. Setting up on that just off wind, or, giving up the wind, but like knowing that you're going to have a thermal advantage in a spot or whatever the case is. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So what was the second one, man? I didn't realize you killed two. I knew of the first one that you sent me. Maybe you did send me the second one. I just didn't recognize it. What was the deal with the second one?
The second one I killed, I think November 11th or no, November 9th. I think I killed that one. And I that was a 6.5-year-old 10-pointer. You almost call him a 12. He's got points coming out of his bases, but
dang,
they're just like little stickers. But he was 143 inches, beautiful buck, mainframe 10 with 25.5-inch main beams.
Nice.
But yeah, he was a good one.
How'd that all come together? Is that a buck that you had like history with, had seen before, or how did that play out?
I didn't know anything about that deer until I found him that morning. I go and I knew there was a couple spots with like some agriculture off the bottom of the mountain that probably be a good spot to pick up some big buck sign. And I'm like, if there's a cluster of sumac trees over there by the one field, and I knew there's signpost rubs in there for a big buck, that there was probably one in the area on the mountain somewhere. And sure enough, I went in there and I located his rubs on the trees in there. I mean, he was shredding from my waist up to my shoulder on trees, big rubs, and I basically, I was like, all right, I got his rubs here. And then I got on the roadway and I basically just kind of drove down the road with my head out the window, looking for trails going across. And I was just checking trails with tracks going across, looking for a big set of tracks coming across. I finally found a 4-finger set of tracks going across on the one trail. Go in and check. And sure enough, there's a big cedar tree that he was rubbing before he crossed the road, but you couldn't see the rub from the road because it was on the wrong side of the tree. So I kind of continued down and just double checked that everything was 100%, that this is where the deer was consistently going through, and I determined it was. So I just parked my Jeep, got up on that trail, and started backtracking him all the way up into the mountain. And I followed that deer, following a bunch of does, and then the does went off into one bull. But I saw that his tracks would cut off from the does and leave them and parallel a swamp on the bottom of the mountain. So I followed them that way along this big swamp and followed them through. And then finally I get probably half a mile down that swamp line. And then I kind of lost his track for a little bit. It took me an hour or two to find it again. And I picked his track back up, going up the side of the mountain. And I tracked him up to the top of the mountain, hit a big primary scrape up on top that he was using. That was not super fresh, but it was like from like the day before, for like an exit from bedding. And I just kind of followed. I went one way, figuring maybe he went towards the does, and I turned around and I decided he wasn't going that way because the sign wasn't getting any hotter on that direction. So I went back the other way down the mountain. I walked away from the does, and after probably another hour or so, I kind of felt like I was getting real close to that deer, and he was bedded up right next to a big bull on the leeward side of the mountain in a briar patch over there. That was where he could lay in the sun. And he basically, it was when he would get up to leave his bed, he'd get up with the wind to his nose and take the same route right above that top of that bull out, and then work that ridge line down towards the other bull that the does were bedding in. So I killed him there on a good pinch point. I found a spot where there's Werner pools. I got this wrong last time too, but they're like these pools of standing water that always hold water up on, and that those pools, I use that because I figured that's going to be hotter than the air. So that was my thermal pool to beat that deer. So I got up in a tree right over that pool, and I was basically all my scent was getting sucked down into that pool instead of getting blown at the deer. And I sat up there, and he came in wind to his nose 30 yards in front of me and cut down and hit a big primary scrape coming out of his bedding area right there. And he didn't make it any farther than that.
He didn't make it any further. That's a good way to end that. He didn't make it any further than that. That was the last.
But I actually heard that deer stand up in his bed and walk out. And I was set up probably 160 yards from him.
Right. Damn, man.
So I was like right there on him.
And that's cool that like he had an interesting, you could probably tell from his rubs that it was that deer too. Whenever you saw that track and then that rub, it was probably distinct based on like what he had on his, like the stickers he had on his bases, right?
Yeah, you could see where his burr points were just shredding into the bark.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're like 1 inch stickers on his bases. Nice. Where he was rubbing.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
He was shredding trees. He was a good buck.
Nice, man. Yeah, that's killer, dude. Whenever you can kind of backtrack him like that and set up and, use all those little kind of tricks of like setting up over that water to get that little thermal pool to get your advantage or whatever. It's like that's some ninja stuff, man. So, good for you.
Every time I kill a buck over like 5.5, 6.5, it's usually something like that. I don't usually get like randomly.
Right. Yeah.
Usually something similar to that situation. My Pennsylvania buck from the year before was like that too. It's 7.5-year-old Pennsylvania deer. And the same thing. I jumped that deer 3 days prior and basically kind of tracked his circuit around on the edge of the swamp where he was living. He was living up on a swamp on the top of the mountain, big swamp. And that deer wouldn't leave that swamp until dark. He'd work certain rub lines and stuff inside the swamp, but he'd never come out.
Right.
So I killed that deer on the ground.
Damn.
When I was working in to find a place to set up, I came around the corner and he was there and rubbing a tree, and I closed the distance and got up from 60 yards to 10 yards or 30 yards. And then he turned around from the tree and walked right at me, and I shot him at a frontal at like 10 feet.
Damn. That's bananas, dude. Well, shit,
Yeah, and
man.
that's the same thing at that time of year, because then I killed that other monster in Jersey that I've been after for years in the same kind of situation on the ground, like a week or two later.
That's a good stretch, man. That's a good 2-year stretch.
Yeah,
For
I shot four big bucks last year, and I shot 2 this year.
Yeah,
And
man.
I still got some. I might get another one. We'll see.
Yeah. You still have a Pennsylvania tag, right, for late season?
Yeah, I got Pennsylvania. I still got an Ohio tag too.
Are you going to make
So
it
I
back
might
out
try.
to? Are you going to make it out there?
I might try.
Yeah.
Might
Nice.
as well. If I get time, I'll go try to fill it.
Right.
So.
Well, man, I've kept you just about an hour and 20 some odd minutes, man. I want to be sensitive to your time. I know we got the holiday here, because we're recording this the night before Thanksgiving, and I actually have to pack to get ready to get out of town for the holiday. But before I let you go, I got one last really hard question for you if you're game for it. You ready?
Sounds good.
All right. So you're making a basketball team of a 3-on-3 basketball. You know what a 3-on-3 tournament is, right? Of basketball?
Yep.
All right. So you're making a basketball team for a 3-on-3 tournament, but it's not basketball. It's a hunting tournament. And you have to pick the 3 best hunters that you can think of to fill tags on public land to try to win this 3-on-3 tournament, to compete in this tournament. Who are those 3 hunters? They can be known, unknown, famous, not famous, dead, alive. It doesn't matter. Who are those 3 bow hunters you're putting on your team to fill public land tags?
I'd probably pick, for one. I'll take Joe Daft, because he's a good, solid hunter, and I know he's got the drive to do it and get it done. And I'll pick my my buddy Mike, who he actually hasn't killed too many big bucks, but he's helped me pull out every single one I ever shot in the last couple of years that I needed help with. So I definitely would be getting him.
Nice.
Who's
the last one?
Good guy.
Nice.
And then for the last one, probably pick my my buddy Ray Norman, because I know he can get it done. He doesn't get enough time to go hunting that much work, but when he gets out, he usually gets right on a big buck every year.
Nice.
And he's a good guy. So.
Nice. Well, that sounds like a good team, man. I can't argue with any of those choices. But you have yourself a good Thanksgiving, brother. Have yourself a good Christmas here coming up. Hope you and your family are well. Hope you get a chance to fill a few more tags, and at some point you and I need to probably meet up and hang out. Maybe me, you, and Joe get together, do some scouting or something like that.
Yeah, I'm down. I know Joe wants me to get up there and help him, so I'll
Awesome.
go up there and go figure out those deer.
For sure, man.
Well, I love scouting new stuff. It's so much fun.
Yeah, no.
If you saw how many pins I have on Onyx right now, you'd laugh. It's pretty ridiculous.
Nice. Well, hey, man, where can people follow along with you? You know, Facebook, Instagram, anything like that, where people can kind of keep up with what you're up to?
You can find me on Facebook.
Okay.
Paul Putera on Facebook.
Awesome.
And if anybody needs help or anything, just send me a PM. I'm glad to help. I always try to answer everybody's questions when they send me a PM.
Awesome. Well, brother, you have yourself a good night and enjoy the holiday. Eat lots of turkey, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, you too.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you'd be able to do those 2 things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.